Namaste. Welcome. We will begin some new work. Together, we will gather under the umbrella of Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine. You'll remember 10 years ago or more, we went through The Life Divine word by word, page by page. That's not our intention this time. That audio record of what we did is available on our website, and you can go there and listen to it if you like. Some of our video is available at our associated YouTube website, and we'll be putting more up, we anticipate. So we come to the Life Divine in hopes that we can move through it rather thematically. But before we begin moving through it thematically, I think we ought to set a bit of a context with it. The Life Divine, of course, is the leading article, as long as it ran, in the journal, philosophic in nature, called Arya. This was his philosophic vision. That, the Life Divine, that is, synthesis of yoga, secret of the Veda, etc., Vedic translations in the Isha Upanishad appear in the first year of the Arya's publication, and most of them, except for one, continue throughout that year. Later, some other things begin, with which you're very familiar, like essays on the Gita, etc. But the journal itself was conceived in conversation with his two French visitors who had arrived on the 29th of March in 1914, Mira and Paul Richard. And their enthusiasm about the breadth and the nature of his vision was brought into a nutshell with the idea that perhaps a journal could be begun where he could serially put these ideas to the world and have them published in both French and English to make sure that the Western world, as well as all of India, could read these materials and respond, to associate themselves with higher ideas. Sri Aurobindo was agreeable. He had ironically noted somewhere that he spun out the idea that a yogi should be able to turn his hand at anything. And so when this was presented to him, he couldn't say no. But he didn't regard himself as a philosopher. And I think he is something more than a philosopher, frankly. He isn't following a line of reasoning to a conclusion. He has a vision, and he expounds it in a way that embraces the mind and its many possibilities, but ultimately stretches the mind towards new avenues of awareness, different experience of reality, something that gets beyond conventional thought and the obvious contradictions of life. He had said about his journal that it wasn't conceived as, quote, the mouthpiece of a sect, school, or already organized way of thinking. It was rather an attempt to feel out for the thought of the future. Thought is a word that we can begin with, but we know full well that Sri Aurobindo had already launched himself beyond the realm, really, of mere thought and was in entering vistas of the creative real idea, the consciousness of rhythm, how truth orders itself. That was based on experience, not on ratiocination. So really, the life divine at its most compelling moments is a record of his vision. He is indeed a rishi. He was correctly seen by his peers in the day as not even being a yogi, but something greater than a yogi. He simply didn't live in oneness. He lived in oneness and communed continually with the Supreme, never having for a moment stepped out of his cardinal realizations of Brahma Nirvana in 1908, and later his recognition of the universal Godhead, the Vishwarupa of Krishna, Vasudeva, inhabiting all beings, manifesting the cosmos, gods, demons, people, insects, everything comes from indeed that one source. Both of these conjoined in him before ever he came to Pondicherry. And when he came to Pondicherry, he had with him a program for self-development. And we see his philosophy as a way of explaining this expansion and deepening of being to the mind so that the mind could participate in this ascent. He said he didn't write this for philosophers or for even the readers of his journal, but he wrote it for himself. Well, he wrote it so that the mind could climb. This was the point, is the point yet. And it's what we feel when we read Sri Aurobindo, whether it's his wonderful prose or his powerful poetry. It is magnetic. It draws us up. It fills us with insight, with bliss. We begin to know, at least through an echo, of what it was that he experienced, and we feel drawn to it too. It awakens aspiration. And to get through dark times, there's nothing like aspiration. So we need this with us now. We need to aspire beyond the conflicts of ordinary humanity as it continues to move in its dull round again and again and again, good versus evil, evil versus good, and rise to a higher height. We can only do that when we have gone to a deeper depth. So there's much to do. But this philosophy that he presents is a hopeful plan, and it chalks out for us the very nature of being, the call to manifestation. What is it that the divine intends in the cosmos? What is deeply embedded in it? So those themes we'll touch upon in a moment, but again, his viewpoints flow out of his profound inner spiritual experience. They are not conclusions of rational argument. They are not logically derived. His capacious experience reconciles contradictions. So vast is it. Well, he began a commentary in Pondicherry when he arrived there, shortly after he arrived there, on the Isha Upanishad, one of the shortest Upanishads, which later he would comment upon in the pages of the Arya, and he called that commentary the Life Divine. It is a handy compendium to the vast and harmonic vision that Vedanta offers us. He also had read and translated the Taittiriya Upanishad, and we saw when we concluded that in recent weeks that all the concordant elements of his philosophy, his understanding of world after world after world, built one upon the other, leading up to a climax of bliss, is what is the manifestation of the world. But he did not comment on the Taittiriya. It's a big Upanishad. Lots going on in it. But he focused on the Isha, and he called it the life divine. Now, when Mira and Paul combine their energies with his, and a magazine, a journal will be formed, which is called Arya, meaning the noble one, the lofty, the aspirational. It's distinct in its opening article from the Isha Upanishad. His vision, he begins to unroll. He had that manuscript on the Isha. He set it aside, but he kept the title for himself. And from the middle of May 1914, for about a month, he worked on it and improved what he was writing. This would be his own vision, and then suddenly set it aside. Somewhere in June, he wrote again, and in 3 days, this article that leads the life divine, that leads the Arya, was formed. He finished it. And while lots of other things were improved upon, edited, rephrased, some dropped altogether, he was always happy with this first chapter. And we'll see why, because next week I propose to you, if you come, that we should read the thing and hear it. So we'll do that next week. The series, The Life Divine, ran from August 1914 until January 1919, in line with roughly the beginning and the end of World War I. When he's preparing after the accident to his leg in 1938 for a book publication, the first part is brought out in November 1939, and the last part in July 1940, in the early phases of World War II. So we see that his vision begins in this first part, and it's called Omnipresent Reality and the Universe in the book form. That's the foundation. There is a second part, 2 parts to the second book, 1,100 pages in the total Life Divine. After he finished working on the Life Divine and set it aside, he noted that he was disappointed because he felt that he had been a little skimpy, those are my words, in his treatment of themes appearing in the first volume, that he wished he'd had a chance because he noted that it was not fully developed. He had no opportunity to expand it. But we can be grateful that when he finished The Life Divine, he didn't return to philosophy, but he returned to poetry. And he continued to work on Savitri, resumed and continued all the way to the end of his life. So this book 1, volume 1 of The Life Divine, as he noted, thoroughly revised and enlarged, was published in November 1939, roughly a month after the accident, a year after the accident to his leg. Had 28 chapters in it, and the first 27 correspond to the 27 chapters as they appeared in the Arya, but he wrote a 28th chapter for this. The nature of the revision is such that we may come back and talk about the details of that, because it is interesting that he would take the typed copy of the text from the Arya and make changes on those. And then they were transferred from the typed copy to the galley proofs by his secretary. That was typically in those days Nolini Kanthagupta. He had an assistant who he recognized was quite talented and a better typist. And so he actually did a lot of the work, and that was M.P. Pundit in his earliest days there in the Sri Aurobindo ashram. Then after getting the galley proofs back, Sri Aurobindo would make further changes directly to the proofs. Those would be incorporated. And as those stand, they don't represent substantial differences from the Arya text. But some changes there are, plus the inclusion of that extra chapter. So I wanted to show you, if I may, if I can do this successfully. This is the first volume, The Life Divine, Volume 1, as published. And we have mentioned this person before. If you can see, there's Sri Aurobindo's signature, giving the book to one of his prominent disciples, Kapali Shastriya. Great Tamil mystic and savant. So, thematic review of the Life Divine. And listen to me go. I've taken half the evening just to get this far. Let's talk about the large ontological themes. We can't take up omnipresent reality without dealing with reality, ontic truth. So we'll see what Sri Aurobindo has to say regarding being and non-being. But out of being, something comes. We deal with the manifestation. Sri Aurobindo agrees that the manifestation in the Vedantic sense is real. It's genuine. It's an expression of a reality which may be transcendent, but it is real too. Purnam Araha, Purnam Idam. That is full, the transcendent. This is full, the cosmic. But we have not simply to deal with cosmos and transcendence, but the place of the individual in the scheme of things. And we've seen in all of his major works, nothing excepted, that there are three terms of being to which he continually refers: the transcendent, the universal, and the individual. All are genuine representations of divine reality, of that omnipresent reality, and they cannot be separated. The individual can become cosmic. The individual can become transcendent. The transcendent can become cosmic. The transcendent can deposit itself, himself, herself, in an individual. The cosmos can reach up to resume its transcendence. It can pour itself fully into the individual. So how is this possible if there are not avenues of consciousness omnidirectional for an omnipresent reality? Not simply that, but this supreme being that the Taittiriya pointed at, Sri Aurobindo identifies again and again and again in successive paragraphs, successive chapters, always returning to this theme that we are dealing with real being, real consciousness, real delight is the substratum of everything here. Otherwise, the universe could not cohere. That bliss is the cause and the power of manifestation, that the universe is an expression of that it is a real expression of that, and not accidental, not fortuitous, but intentional. However wacky, however insentient the engines of the cosmos may appear to be, there is a deep purpose in them. Not teleological in the sense that Western philosophers would trace it, but something that means to come out. In this way, Sri Aurobindo affirms the views of some of his so-called opponents, that there is a will in the universe, but it is a will of delight that wants to express itself in maximum division, in utter opposition of all that it really is above and beyond, but to seek to recapture the harmonic composition and install here the higher virtues of a greater plane of existence. And this means a crawl out of darkness and a climb towards light through which we pass by and, I guess, get stuck in the divisions of the mental being. We won't be there forever. The human is not the final rung on the evolutionary ladder, but this climb out of darkness and towards light is evolution, seeking greater and greater forms of consciousness, greater powers of self-revelation. And in seeking for this, we'll find that that is here. The sevenfold chord of being is something we'll spend time with, one of the prominent chapters in the Life Divine. We'll look into the powers of ignorance, the powers of knowledge. We'll examine the aim of life writ large, personhood, rebirth, Buddhistic views, materialistic views, and more. Now, granted, no topic that we take up can be adequately covered in a single week, and we may leave topics inadequately covered. Our task this time is to examine the warp and the woof of the life divine, theme by theme, and that approach means we won't proceed from chapter 1 in the first book to chapter 28 sequentially. We will take the thread and see where it goes, what it says, where it reappears in the book, touch upon that, and in that way, continue along. When we feel that we've found a destination to that thread, we'll see that it connects to other threads, the ones that we've named and others that we haven't named. And if possible, we'll conclude each session with a relevant reading from Savitri, his epic poem, to which he turned after he finished the Life Divine, always considering himself first a poet, by dint of adverse fate, perhaps, a philosopher. So, I had an idea to read a lengthy passage from Savitri. Would you like to hear? I'll just look at some waving hands. Would you like to hear parts of the first chapter of the Life Divine this evening rather than next week? If so, wave your hands. Ah, okay. Very well. Then you're just the audience I was looking for. Here we are. Chapter 1, The Human Aspiration. She follows to the goal of those that are passing on beyond. She is the first in the eternal succession of the dawns that are coming. Usha widens, bringing out that which lives, awakening someone who was dead. What is her scope when she harmonizes with the dawns that shone out before and those that now must shine? She desires the ancient mornings and fulfills their light. Projecting forwards her illumination, she enters into communion with the rest that are to come. Kutsa Angirasa, Rigveda. Threefold are those supreme births of this divine force that is in the world. They are true, they are desirable. He moves there, wide overt, within the infinite, and shines pure, luminous, and fulfilling. That which is immortal in mortals and possessed of the truth is a God and established inwardly as an energy working out in our divine powers. Become high uplifted, O strength. Pierce all veils. Manifest in us the things of the Godhead. The earliest preoccupation of man in his awakened thoughts, and as it seems, his inevitable and ultimate preoccupation, for it survives the longest periods of skepticism and returns after every banishment, is also the highest which his thought can envisage. It manifests itself in the divination of Godhead, the impulse towards perfection, the search after pure truth and unmixed bliss, the sense of a secret immortality. The ancient dawns of human knowledge have left us their witness to this constant aspiration. Today, we see a humanity satiated but not satisfied by victorious analysis of the externalities of nature, preparing to return to its primeval longings. The earliest formula of wisdom promises to be its last: God, light, freedom, immortality. These persistent ideals of the race are at once the contradiction of its normal experience and the affirmation of higher and deeper experiences which are abnormal to humanity and only to be attained in their organized entirety by a revolutionary individual effort or an evolutionary general progression. To know, possess, and be the divine being in an animal and egoistic consciousness. To convert our twilight or obscure physical mentality into the plenary supramental illumination. To build peace and a self-existent bliss where there is only a stress of transitory satisfactions, besieged by physical pain and emotional suffering, to establish an infinite freedom in a world which presents itself as a group of mechanical necessities, to discover and realize the immortal life in a body subjected to death and constant mutation. This is offered to us as the manifestation of God in matter and the goal of nature in her terrestrial evolution. To the ordinary material intellect, which takes its present organization of consciousness for the limit of its possibilities, the direct contradiction of the unrealized ideals with the realized fact is a final argument against their validity. But if we take a more deliberate view of the world's workings, that direct opposition appears rather as part of nature's profoundest method and the seal of her completest sanction. For all the problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony. They arise from the perception of an unsolved discord and the instinct of an undiscovered agreement or unity. To rest content with an unsolved discord is possible for the practical and more animal part of man, but impossible for his fully awakened mind. And usually, even his practical parts only escape from the general necessity either by shutting out the problem or by accepting a rough, utilitarian, and unillumined compromise. For essentially, all nature seeks a harmony, life and matter in their own sphere as much as mind in the arrangement of its perceptions. The greater the apparent disorder of the materials offered, or the apparent disparateness, even to irreconcilable opposition, of the elements that have to be utilized, the stronger is the spur, and it drives towards a more subtle and puissant order than can normally be the result of a less difficult endeavor. The accordance of active life with a material of form in which the condition of activity itself seems to be inertia is one problem of opposites that nature has solved and seeks always to solve better with greater complexities. For its perfect solution would be the material immortality of a fully organized mind-supporting animal body. The accordance of conscious mind and conscious will with a form and a life in themselves, not overtly self-conscious and capable at best of a mechanical or subconscious will, is another problem of opposites in which she has produced astonishing results and aims always at higher marvels. For there, her ultimate miracle would be an animal consciousness no longer seeking, but possessed of truth and light, with the practical omnipotence which would result from the possession of a direct and perfected knowledge. Not only then is the upward impulse of man towards the accordance of yet higher opposites rational in itself, but it is the only logical completion of a rule and an effort that seem to be a fundamental method of nature and the very sense of her universal strivings. We speak of the evolution of life in matter, the evolution of mind in matter, but evolution is a word which merely states the phenomenon without explaining it. For there seems to be no reason why life should evolve out of material elements or mind out of living form, unless we accept the Vedantic solution that life is already involved in matter and mind in life, because in essence, matter is a form of veiled life, life a form of veiled consciousness. And then there seems to be little objection to a farther step in the series, and the admission that mental consciousness may itself be only a form and a veil of higher states which are beyond mind. In that case, the unconquerable impulse of man towards God, light, bliss, freedom, immortality presents itself in its right place in the chain as simply the imperative impulse by which nature is seeking to evolve beyond mind, and appears to be as natural, true, and just as the impulse towards life, which she has planted in certain forms of matter, or the impulse towards mind, which she has planted in certain forms of life. As there, so here. The impulse exists more or less obscurely in her different vessels, with an ever-ascending series in the power of its will to be. As there, so here, it is gradually evolving and bound fully to evolve the necessary organs and faculties. As the impulse towards mind ranges from the more sensitive reactions of life in the metal and the plant up to its full organization in man, so in man himself there is the same ascending series, the preparation, if nothing more, of a higher and divine life. The animal is a living laboratory in which nature has, it is said, worked out man. Man himself may well be a thinking and living laboratory, in whom and with whose conscious cooperation she wills to work out the Superman, the God. Or shall we not say, rather, to manifest God? For if evolution is the progressive manifestation by nature of that which slept or worked in her, involved, it is also the overt realization of that which she secretly is. We cannot, then, bid her pause at a given stage of her evolution, nor have we the right to condemn with the religionist as perverse and presumptuous, or with the rationalist as a disease or hallucination, any intention she may evince or effort she may make to go beyond. If it be true that spirit is involved in matter, and apparent nature is secret God, then the manifestation of the divine in himself and the realization of God within and without are the highest and most legitimate aim possible to man upon earth. Thus, the eternal paradox and eternal truth of a divine life in an animal body, an immortal aspiration or reality inhabiting a mortal tenement, a single and universal consciousness representing itself in limited minds and divided egos, a transcendent, indefinable, timeless, and spaceless being who alone renders time and space and cosmos possible. And in all these, the higher truth, realizable by the lower term, justify themselves to the deliberate reason as well as to the persistent instinct or intuition of mankind. Attempts are sometimes made to have done finally with questionings which have so often been declared insoluble by logical thought, and to persuade men to limit their mental activities to the practical and immediate problems of their material existence in the universe. but such evasions are never permanent in their effect. Mankind returns from them with a more vehement impulse of inquiry, a, or a more violent hunger for an immediate solution. By that hunger, mysticism profits, and new religions arise to replace the old that have been destroyed or stripped of significance by a skepticism which itself could not satisfy because, although its business was inquiry, it was unwilling sufficiently to inquire. The attempt to deny or stifle the truth because it is yet obscure in its outward workings, and too often represented by obscurantist superstition or a crude faith, is itself a kind of obscurantism. The will to escape from a cosmic necessity, because it is arduous, difficult to justify by immediate tangible results, slow in regulating its operations, must turn out eventually to have been no acceptance of the truth of nature, but a revolt against the secret, mightier will of the Great Mother. It is better and more rational to accept what she will not allow us as a race to reject, and lifted from the sphere of blind instinct, obscure intuition, and random aspiration into the light of reason and an instructed and consciously self-guiding will. And if there is any higher light of illumined intuition or self-revealing truth which is now in man either obstructed and inoperative, or works with intermittent glancings as if from behind a veil, or with occasional displays as of the northern lights in our material skies, then there also we need not fear to aspire. For it is likely that such is the next higher state of consciousness, of which mind is only a form and veil, and through the splendors of that light may lie the path of our progressive self-enlargement into whatever highest state is humanity's ultimate resting place. I think we can agree with Sri Aurobindo that one ought to be happy with this essay. Others he would revise. This one, never. But having read that, we can't resist, even though it be late, to read the first page of Savitri, Canto 1, The Symbol Dawn. Some of you, I know, have memorized this and have it by heart. It was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night alone in her unlit temple of eternity lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable, in the somber symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. A fathomless zero occupied the world. A power of fallen boundless self awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the tenebrous womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. As in a dark beginning of all things, a mute, featureless semblance of the unknown, repeating forever the unconscious act, prolonging forever the unseeing will, cradled the cosmic drowse of ignorant force, whose moved creative slumber kindles the suns and carries our lives in its somnambulist whirl. Athwart the vain, enormous trance of space, its formless stupor without mind or life, a shadow spinning through a soulless void, thrown back once more into unthinking dreams, earth wheeled, abandoned in the hollow gulfs, forgetful of her spirit and her fate. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea, insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be, teased the inconscient to wake ignorance. A throe that came and left a quivering trace, gave room for an old tired want unfilled, at peace in its subconscient moonless cave, to raise its head and look for absent light, straining closed eyes of vanished memory, like one who searches for a bygone self and only meets the corpse of his desire. It was as though even in this naught's profound, even in this ultimate dissolution's core, there lurked an unremembering entity, survivor of a slain and buried past, condemned to resume the effort and the pang, reviving in another frustrate world. An unshaped consciousness desired light, and a blank prescience yearned towards distant change, as if a childlike finger laid on a cheek reminded of the endless need in things, the heedless mother of the universe, an infant longing clutched the somber vast. Insensibly somewhere a breach began, a long, lone line of hesitating hue, like a vague smile tempting a desert heart, troubled the far rim of life's obscure sleep. Arrived from the other side of boundlessness, an eye of deity peered through the dumb deeps, a scout in a reconnaissance from the sun. It seemed amid a heavy cosmic rest, the torpor of a sick and weary world, to seek for a spirit sole and desolate, too fallen to recollect forgotten bliss. Intervening in a mindless universe, its message crept through the reluctant hush, calling the adventure of consciousness and joy, and conquering nature's disillusioned breast, compelled renewed consent to see and feel.